Alrighty, that is going. So welcome everyone to another one of our Ask an Expert webinars. Today the topic will be baselines in a hybrid business environment. So if we could just jump to the next slide, please, Ryan. Okay, so as always, I'd just like to run through a bit of housekeeping. So throughout this session, if we could please remain on mute while Ryan is presenting. If you do want to contribute anything, feel free to type in the chat box or raise your hand and you can come off mute. We will also have time for questions at the end. And here's our panel. So today Ryan will be presenting along with Mark facilitating the session. So yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the gripping concept of baselines. I know it's not the most exciting thing, but it's actually really important. And it's something that when we are consulting with our clients comes up over and over again. Something that's really simple, but somehow just never seems to work that well. And once we've brought in Agile, as well as traditionally Waterfall, we now have a further dimension to these baselines. So today, we're going to go through what a baseline really is, okay? Why they're important, why it's hard. And when we get to that point, I'm really interested in feedback from you. So we'll give you opportunity, type into the chat. Generally, people don't baseline. Half people don't baseline. So I'm interested in why. We are going to talk about a bit of an agile approach, or not agile approach, an approach of combining agile and waterfall into one baseline. And we will then answer some questions as we go through. So thanks to all of you who had submitted things already. And we will have, as Gemma said, time to answer questions. So what's a baseline? Okay, well, there are a lot of definitions of a baseline. It's, in one way, it's that line in the sand that you measure from. It's from the technical definition, it's part of your calculation of your variance, okay? So it becomes a reference point. It's that point where if you get to the baseline, you need to make a decision as to what you do next. But what it truly is an agreement. It's the formalization of an agreement. A baseline can be anything. As long as we all together have agreed that this is what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, what it's going to cost, and what we're going to get in return for doing this work, any variation from that, any deviation from that is us moving away from the baseline, and that gives us the variance, okay? So a baseline at the end of the day doesn't have to be overcomplicated and thought of as a calculation, it's a field in a schedule and it's used in a calculation. Yeah, it is that, but it's actually about an agreement. Okay. Now, the reason for having that agreement is so that when you are in the depths of a project and it's chaos and it's now a financial year end, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking like TikTok, let's get going here because you've got to get onto dealing with financial year end problems. And you can't remember how you started the project and you're in trouble and you can't quite articulate why you're in trouble. It's like, well, you need to refer back to that agreement. You need something formal to refer back to say, hang on, we all agree that this is what we would do, how we would do it, when we would do it, what it would cost, what our benefit would actually be. So we ground ourselves back to that agreement in whatever form that agreement has been formalized in. That is a baseline. Okay, so I'm going to start this thing right off in the beginning and just kind of sidetrack slightly. Can agile projects have a baseline? So Gemma's going to start a poll up. And I'm interested in what you think, because I've asked around and I've had some very clear answers in all directions on this. So I'm interested in what you guys think. And then we'll get Mark or Gemma to just read the results to me, because having 3 monitors still doesn't mean I can see the poll results.
At the moment, we have 95% at yes and 5% at no.
Okay, so I'm not going to say the 95% are right and the 5% are wrong, but if you think of this concept of a baseline as just an agreement, anything can have a baseline, be it agile or not, okay? It just depends on how we define and how we take that baseline. Okay, any extra people have jumped in there?
No,
We're
it's still
now sitting at
95.5.
Yeah. So
Okay.
the vast majority
I'm
agrees
saying
that,
yes.
yeah,
Cool. Okay, this will be an easy, quick session then. You can get back to your end of financial year lunch. Okay, so let's talk about why we have this baseline. Yeah, Mark, you're going to jump in there?
I was just wondering if we all say that, how are how are the users actually baseline the agile projects? That would be my question. Yeah.
As we get a few slides in, we're going to get to a discussion on that. So why a baseline? Well, as I said, it's an agreement. Okay, so if you don't have a baseline, you're basically navigating without a compass. You're sailing your ship and you don't know where you're going. Okay, you've got a compass, but it hasn't got a needle on it. So you can't compare it to someone missing north. You can't compare it to something. So you baseline to have something to measure against. So are we drifting from the agreement? It gives you the basis of control. So you're actually, you can't have control unless you can control against some sort of agreement. It gives you clear expectations as well. This is what we're doing. We agreed on it. Let's all keep focused on this. A plan that's agreed to, you could say, yeah, but that's the plan. But it's not a plan. It does nothing unless you've agreed to it, which makes it a baseline. It gives us something to communicate against. And it gives us a way to really focus on risk. Because ultimately, what are we trying to do here? We are trying to get an outcome, so to achieve that strategic goal, and we're trying to reduce the risk of getting to that outcome. So we need something. Don't chase every single risk. Chase the risks that are impacting what you agreed would be delivered on. Okay, that's what's important. And if you then change your mind, well, change means you had something and you moved to something else. Well, we had a baseline and we moved to something else and now to new baseline. Agreement, change to new agreement. Okay. And also from an artificial intelligence perspective, which is kind of a theme these days, the baseline becomes a data point. The machine can't learn unless it knows that you agreed to something and you have now changed and I learned the change. Okay. So it needs the baseline for the learning. Now, related kind of a little bit to what Mark was just saying, I want to talk about tasks. Traditionally, when people get taught about baselines, they're baselining schedules. Okay. I'm interested in you. We're going to talk about a lot more than that, by the way, but I'm interested in just some numbers here. Who's baselining tasks currently? So schedules. Who's actually doing a schedule baseline? Let's call it task, not schedule, because it could be agile. It doesn't have to be a schedule as such. Who is baselining this in some way? So it's either going to be formally or you're doing it yourself. Maybe you sometimes do it, or maybe you just never really do it.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to share to you what a wider, we did survey wider clients. I'm going to share what they do. Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, so the formally PMO managed baseline is out by 60%,
Okay.
followed, funnily enough, by the I sometimes baseline.
Yeah.
Then no formal baseline, but I always baseline myself is 18%.
Okay. Okay, it's not too bad, but it's interesting that I sometimes baseline. That's kind of what I expected. So what I'm going to share with you here is what wider, we obviously over more than a decade have many clients, and we've surveyed quite a few of them around this. And these are some numbers. So 53% of tasks that they're maintaining are baselined, 47% aren't. So roughly half of the work going on out there is sailing your sailing ship through the ocean without a north in your compass. Okay. So if you are over, Mark, you've taken too long on the task, you could turn around and say, says who? Where did we agree on this? You know, where is the baseline? And this is a problem because this then impacts reporting and everything else. So baselining is a problem. And today I want to get into a bit of the depths as to why people don't religiously baseline. So you can't manage a project without baseline. Okay, so we're going to do another poll. Okay, and that is about the world is bigger than just tasks. We need to think about what do we baseline. And there is a very long list of things you can baseline, and we will get into that next. But I'm interested in what else you're baselining beyond tasks. And I should have maybe made other a bit bigger because there are other things there as well. But the obvious ones are tasks and budget. Scope is scope, the scope agreement or work product structure is the one I actually forgot to put on there.
So interesting. This is a close race between a budget is baselined and overall project dates is about 36%, and scheduled tasks is about 27%, and others is 8%. So the top three are sort of the main reasons. I mean, this would ultimately be also my question, right? If we talk about the purpose of a baseline, and that baseline is the agreement or the common formal understanding of what we agreed to, how important is it then really to baseline the tasks? I think the task is really only baselining the tasks is really only a consequence out of the discovery of how we make up these project dates, really.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
You know,
it's levels. Essentially, it's about levels of baseline, levels of agreement, and who needs it. If I am the Scrum Master dealing with a sprint, maybe I need to baseline what's in that sprint, or a project manager doing just some individual tasks. But higher up, though, we have different types of baselines. Okay.
Yeah, and behind that, Ryan, if you just go one step back, in terms of the overarching things that we baseline, my question is, of course, what is it that we actually baseline? What values constitute the baseline?
Yeah.
Is budget actually a baseline, or can we get a budget for a project, but we still haven't established a baseline in terms of time? So that baseline terminology is quite often used for different types of reasons. Yeah,
it is. And this is kind of what it's about, is that if we think of it's about agreement. So you could agree, as you said, on the cost or the budget over time. This is how much money we have, and we've agreed we'll spend that, but we haven't yet agreed on the scope. Okay, I keep forgetting to put the scope part in here, but there should be scope as part of this, and then there should be schedule as to when we're going to do it. So what are you going to do? How much is it going to cost? When will you do it? Who? We had an agreement. Mark, you said I could have 3 resources full time. You've now taken one away. The agreement's broken. I don't know why I'm unhappy about it, but oh, hang on, I go back to the agreement. I've got that. So everything comes together, and it could legitimately be a separate set of baselines. It may not be directly related, but it's a minimum you've got to have the baselines. Now, baselines on different levels. So the darker blue boxes are very much project level. So obviously, schedule, cost, resourcing, set of documents, initial set of specifications, versioning of these things are very important. It's going to depend on the industry you're in, but some of them, the construction specs and things get very important. A set of risks. We agreed, there's almost assumptions become a part of your baseline, that we agreed we'd start the project under these terms, these risks, and now things have changed, okay? We reserve the right to then replan. But it goes up from there. So this all rolls up to be project agreements of some sort. But they then form overall your portfolio and your program, which includes your benefits and everything. What is the set of agreements there? This rolls up to, we agreed on a prioritized list of work. And there'll be no priorities change all the time. Especially a senior manager walks into the room, they change the priorities. How do we combat against that? Well, we have our baseline list of priorities, and this is really supporting the overall strategic roadmap. If you look at a lot of large organizations, on their website is a strategy document with a high-level sort of roadmap in it. This is way above the project level. This is what they're saying to the public. Government does this really well. This is what we are going to do over the next 4 years or 10 years, etc. That's their baseline. It's almost like election promises, that type of thing. It's agreement. And from there, everything rolls down. So when we say about baseline, we've got to think of type of baselines. It's not just the go into MS Project, go into the project ribbon on the top and create a new baseline. Now, if you need, so obviously you're going to baseline. So because you are going to baseline more than just the schedule, we hope, you are going to need to go through a planning process. So figure out your scope, figure out who you need to do it, when you'll do it, what it's going to cost, then start monitoring change. That gets you to an agreement that's a collection of different things. So what do you need to do? If you want to you're thinking, yeah, this is a good idea, we need to baseline more than just the schedule. You need a mechanism to create that agreement. Just like how we had a chat in the kitchen, yeah, that's what we'll do. That's not enough. It's got to be formalized. So it's got to be a steering committee or something like that. You need a mechanism to document document it that you can find again, okay? What are you documenting? You're essentially documenting what you'll do, when you'll do it, what it will cost, and what you'll get back for it, okay, in various forms. This then gives you that ability to start measuring performance. So you can now do something with it, so compare to it, and now you can control. And then the question was sent in as well, who should do it and when should you re-baseline? Well, the who is who can hold you to the agreement and who needs to represent up. So if we think of, I go back here, you are thinking about, we're changing agreement around resourcing. Well, this could impact our overall agreement, our program agreement. It starts meaning we can't meet our priorities. Maybe we're doing something strategic. So who represents that up? Usually sitting in the middle is something like a PMO. Could be a project sponsor. So there's no clear answer on who does it, but it's very seldom the project manager. The second thing is, when do you create a new one as opposed to overwrite an existing one? Well, theoretically, you should never overwrite a baseline. Because it's a new agreement, you need that history. The only reason we ever overwrite things or even think about it is because in the past we've had tools like MS Project that allowed us to do 9 or 10 of these things, and we were forced to overwrite them. Okay, that's a tool limitation. We need to think beyond the tool. Tools can be, extended. So you should not have to reuse a baseline unless you made an error. And then when is it time to do it? Well, it's when does the agreement change? How do you know when the agreement changes? You're not looking at this every day. So it may be at set points in your project. You may have end of sprints. You may have end of stages. You may have, in Agile, maybe it's a bigger perspective, it's end of release cycles, etc. So it's at these are the logical points that you could say, take a step back. How are we doing in terms of the agreement? Now, this is all great in theory, but as we saw before, almost half of people are not baselining the simplest thing to baseline, which is a task. This other stuff gets harder to baseline, so you've actually got to create a bit of a process and a library to store this documentation. So why are baselines not actually happening? Well, there are a lot of things, and I did a fair bit of kind of reading up on this to see if the world out there had some views on this. And there's not a lot on baselines. The world runs on a baseline. There's the agreements in place, but there's not a great deal of thought that's actually being formalized out there. But what I have seen is, well, the first one is that people are very optimistic and they tend to do their baseline or their schedule and then baseline it, but they are very hopeful and they don't really factor in things going wrong. So you're going to have a variation very quickly. They also have a very critical path method focus. So it's very one after the other if anything moves. And this is not allowing for maybe we can do things in parallel, etc., different ways of doing things. People struggle to actually formalize that agreement it really is developing a schedule that will be accepted by the team and the stakeholders and communicating it. A lot of people are building schedules for themselves internally in the team. They're not exposing that out, exposing that up to get the agreement. It's kind of what Mark was saying. Do you need to baseline the individual tasks or the overall dates? This is about translating it up to the overall dates and then getting agreement on that. Okay. People sort of see the schedule, well, this is internal and we only update it occasionally and it's that type of thing, as opposed to it's a tool that allows you to get a date to communicate up. And as part of that is the schedule's not always real anyway. So people are being told what the dates are. They effectively hard coding those dates in. Yeah, the boss wanted that, we'll baseline it. So it's kind of the boss's way versus the theoretical or the best practice way, actually, the realistic way. Now, as they're building out, they're planning out this project, you've got to plan it to agree, which gives you your baseline. People are ignoring the black swans. They are ignoring anything that can go wrong. They're not factoring risk into it. So this is one thing that I've seen is a very common thing is people do things in isolation. So, hey, we've got a risk register. That's fine. We've now got a schedule, but we haven't related to each other. The schedule isn't dynamic, okay, and they're just not factoring everything else into it. And when they do create that schedule, which gives them the baseline, they are not looking at bad things that have a low priority. Things that can really upset your project, they're like, yeah, it's unlikely to happen, don't worry about it. We won't factor it in when you need to think about these things. So they're not bringing risk into it. And the largest one, when I had a chat with a few people, is you just get told there's political pressure. Your baseline is meaningless. Essentially, you're given a bunch of dates, that's the agreement, but there isn't a relationship to reality. You need to, yeah, sure, you've got to top down, but you've got to have realistic bottom up, meet in the middle, and then form an agreement. So let's say you survive this, you get through it all, and you actually end up with a usable baseline. What changes it? Well, simply anything that changes the agreement. So things can happen. Scope changes, resources change. You find out your estimate was wrong, etc. It impacts your baseline. Your controls will pick it up. You're going to change your project, but don't just change it. Get the agreement and cycle it around again. So it's a simple closed loop. Now, that's enough of the theory of baselines. Let's start looking at the agile side. So what I'm going to take you through is just a little bit of stuff, and it's based on the mechanism for baselines that was created by a project manager at a superannuation company here in Brisbane. Okay. And this was a long time ago. It's like 12, 13 years ago. And I always thought it was very simple, very elegant. I've since looked for better ways to do it. So I'm interested as I'm going to go through this. Those of you who are doing a hybrid approach now, and a hybrid really is, I've got traditional waterfall. So it's the critical path method, which is waterfall. If design moves, build will move, okay, essentially. Related to a parallel approach that we have with Agile. All these things are going on at once. It's more you're doing a lot of things as a team together. You're not doing one thing after the other. How do we bring this together? Now, for those who said Agiles don't have a baseline, think of what a concept of a baseline is. It's an agreement, okay? So what could a baseline be in Agile? Well, you have a backlog. That is your initial baseline. We started with this. Now, yeah, you are going to keep adding to this thing and grooming it, etc. But at a point, you had this, and people was kind of bought into something here. That becomes an initial type of baseline. You then say, okay, it's fine. There's certain things we can deal with in this backlog, and we create out a release plan. Well, you then have to start thinking about who's going to do this work, and you're going to actually resource it out. You end up with a resource plan coming off this. No matter what you do, people are people. Whichever methodology you use, you need to plan the people out. So that gives you a baseline. It's agreement on that I actually have these people. There's an agreement on we will have certain dates and certain big picture items will be released. You then get down into the details. You're now planning out your sprint. The team themselves are agreeing on what they're going to do in that sprint. Product owners agreeing it with them. And over the next 2 weeks, we'll do this. It's an agreement. It's effectively a baseline. Okay. So there are baselines in Agile, just in different forms. It's at that point where we need to start thinking, how do we create a unified timeline that can merge our Agile project in with some waterfall projects to be related on the agreement on the program level, the portfolio level as we go up. Okay. And the approach that was taken with the superannuation company was it's about end of sprint dates. We don't have individual little tasks. So we want to kind of get away from Mark is doing this on Tuesday, Ryan's doing that on Wednesday, Gemma's doing that on Thursday, as we would potentially automatically baseline in an MS project schedule. It's too fine detailed. The high level agreement is the overall date. So what are we going to deliver when? Agile sprints give us an endpoint. Depends on what you're doing. Within our company, we did every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, you have an endpoint, and you know you're getting certain things done by that point. That gives us a date. Okay. So to bring it together, what we're doing is we are starting at the bottom. Typically, we have milestones, milestones are usually related to the end of stage in a waterfall project. Well, we have end of sprints now. We have certain things we need to get done at the end of a sprint. So someone sitting on the top here wanting their sort of unified report on the top is able to say, I'm getting this widget at the end of the stage or this widget at the end of the sprint or the end of this release. It gives me an endpoint. It's not about, we sort of shift the definition slightly. So we're not saying on this exact day in the middle of the cycle, we'll do this. It's more run to the end. Team is free to do what they need to do up until the endpoint, and end of sprint, a whole bunch of milestones bubble up and they can be reported on. When we then need to report on the progress, this is where it changes slightly, because we've changed the model now, in that usually you would, on a waterfall project, you're focused on percent complete. This isn't going to mean, because percent complete is duration based. It's not going to mean exactly the same thing in an agile project, but because they focus on more like story points, what have you got done in the sprint? Well, if you just focus on the number of, just as a rough measure, the number of tasks completed, in that it gets you on an even level with the story points, and you can then start to report on progress. This brings you up to this unified timeline, which has now got a combination of milestones or tasks at the end of a cycle, end of sprint or end of stage, as they're actually coming through. Now, is this the best thing for you? Well, this depends. It depends on what will really work for you. This is an example that was created for a superannuation company, and it works for them.
Hey, Ryan.
Mark, yeah.
Now, looking at this, right, I wrote a couple of things down, and I wonder what your take on this is. So, so really, you're talking in terms of baseline, you're talking about an agreement. It's actually, I think, an agreement to commit to this plan, right? So it's really the commitment is ultimately the part. And I think that's why a lot of people are quite uncomfortable with that sort of approach, because commitment also, adds pressure to that. But really, if you think about that, it is not so much the agreement. The agreement is just us shaking the hand saying, yeah, look, we think that's possible. But it is actually the ability for us trying to stay predictable on the outcome of our work, right? So that's really what we are trying to achieve with the reporting, and the formality is one thing, but really what that reporting and formality and variation tells us ultimately is nothing else but saying, hey, we are on that course of achieving that, and throughout the time that it takes us to do the work, to complete our goal, to complete the outcome, that is the path we need to change. And I think that formality, so when we're talking about that reporting framework, I think the one critical part missing here, I know you refer to this as milestone and progress, but really it should ultimately be about tracking the outcome. So where we say milestones and progress, we should actually say we need to be able to track the progress of our outcome. And if we believe that the current course that we are going is not going to reach that goal, we will need to change that course. And therefore, we agree to that change of course. So that's really the translation of all of the stuff that we are doing formally right now to satisfy every single person who wants to have a say. But if you look at if you boil it down to the essence, really, it is us trying to achieve an outcome or outcomes, goals, because goals can have multiple outcomes, and trying to navigate, trying to find a navigation to that, and then both of the all parties responsible for that say, yeah, I think that's actually what we want to do. So that concept of outcome and not output, as I like to say it, first of all, how do we define outcome? And secondly, how can we then track that against that overarching unified reporting framework, right?
The concept of an outcome is a unification of it in itself, because every project, regardless of the methodology, results in an outcome, an output and an outcome. Okay. So if you think of, just go to the beginning here, you're planning far from the top. You don't care how it gets delivered. You don't care if you buy it or you deliver it yourself. You're essentially focused on, we strategically need certain outcomes. And you're agreeing on that on the high level. Okay. So how do you define the outcome? It's, well, so I guess a little trickier, because you need to link, I'm not sure I have an answer here, but you need to link required outcomes to a project outcome and what it can do. We're starting to get into kind of benefits territory here as well, but this becomes a whole, confusing thing in its own. So as a minimum, just if we sort of think of things like milestones, or just list these, you're doing a bunch of work. There's an outcome. To say you've achieved the outcome, you need to meet certain criteria. So yeah, we've actually done these. Let the team figure out how they're going to do it themselves. But that outcome will need a date. It essentially becomes another level above whatever your tasks are. They're almost like tasks. They're time-based.
But for me,
it's bubbled up milestones.
A milestone is nothing else but, for me, being a marker of a path to reach my goal, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we have 1, sometimes we have 15, sometimes we have reportable milestones, non-reportable milestones. But again, they are just the consequence of where we are. The outcome focus is very important, and I think in terms of agile, that makes it actually very, very relevant, because trying to bring milestones and timelines in that sense together will be difficult, but tying, no matter whether you have a waterfall or agile, tying that to outcome, you have the ability to do that. So Sean, for example, he wrote, end of sprint is a terrible reportable milestone for me from a portfolio perspective, which I agree, because we actually don't know what the outcome of all of that was, right? It's just a progress thing.
It's not, sorry, what I meant there, okay, we're on the same page here. It's not about end of sprint the date, it's about what you were given at the end of the sprint. So it's about the outcome at the end of the sprint, and did you get the outcome when you expected it? So in the window of the sprint. So yes, when this says milestone, it's about translating that into outcomes, and that becomes what unifies you.
Exactly, and that was my point, Ryan, right? So that unfortunately these days we are all still so much entrenched in, milestone is date, cost, resources. You showed them all in the previous list. You know what was missing? The outcome.
True.
What am I going to deliver? Because the effort and the resources and the risk involved and all of those things are nothing else but a consequence of what I need to do in order to reach those outcomes. So that should actually ultimately be, in that sense, outcome focused, right? How to achieve that is actually the challenging part, I believe, because as a key stakeholder, I don't mind whether you accomplished milestone 1 or 2 or 16. I want to know what outcome did I get, right?
It's essentially
that's exactly right.
It's translating that into the outcome. The outcome becomes the concept of an outcome is common across everything, and that is what is actually allowing you to unify all of this.
Because when you think about it in time, right? Okay, waterfall has design, plan, execute, close. Agile has nothing else. They just have consistent timelines, right? They have sprint. So
but
for me,
they have outcomes at the end of sprint. By the end of a sprint, you can get an outcome. So that's exactly why we have end of sprint. It's just to catch a date. That's all.
So that's why I'm saying, is it really that important? Baselining tasks? No, it's important understanding when I get those, and that's the same with agile, and that's where I agree with Sean.
Sean, you're exactly right there. So essentially, when I say milestones, it's actually that's got to be translated into outcomes. I don't know what's going on till I get to the end of the sprint. Did I receive the outcome I expected at the end of the sprint? Yes or no? That's essentially what you are baselining. I expect certain outcomes at those standard time windows, being sprints, and did I get them or not?
So in my world, the biggest challenge, Ryan, I see is not agreeing to the baselines in terms of all of the things you've mentioned, cost, time, resources. I think that the difficult part is actually agreeing on the outcome, right? And the measurement of that outcome. And if you incorporate that, I believe if we incorporate that into that bigger picture of baselining, then we suddenly understand that even though in the past we felt that baseline as a formal burden on our shoulder, I'm going to say, because that's what we had to dodge or explain why variations occur, to actually it gives us the path to achieve where we want to get to, right?
It's the path and it's the agreement of ultimately what we are doing, when we're doing it, why we're doing it. So that's essentially what. So the way I'm trying to explain this, we're redefining the definition of a baseline away from that little, did I get this task done on this day exactly, a variance for every little line? Don't worry so much about that. You need to think about all the other things. Now, you've highlighted
like a map. You know, it's
exactly
like a map. Course, like a map, right? When you have your GPS, you say, hey, I need to go to Brisbane. And suddenly halfway through, it even changes the course because it recognizes that there were some obstacles. And that's really what that is about as well, right?
That's why we have the compass. And without that baseline, you have a compass without a north on it. So you can't find your way along that path.
So and again, lovely feedback on some of them, especially in the Agile, because I think this is still a fluffy way, right? A lot of Agile people would say, oh, no, we don't use the terminology baseline in a classical sense. So there is another nice feedback. There is completion of epics, maybe a better milestone.
Yes,
maybe.
Yeah.
Great idea, and it also says, yes, agree. Epics are good, but can be too low level for portfolio reporting, which is also
depends what you're trying to do.
It's interesting. It's really how do you map the different levels of organizing your work so that you find that commonality, really? Yeah.
So it's all about, essentially, if we think of what this is actually saying, you need to find your level. Okay, you need to find your window, essentially. End of sprint, end of epic, end of whatever, okay? And what are you physically producing? Now, in a traditional waterfall approach, I could get it down to the day. In theory, I can plan to the day on the, what is today, 26th on a Wednesday, this is exactly what we're delivering. Well, without going into if that's realistic or not, with an agile world, you can't do it. So at the end of a window, you say, I expect to have this as an output. Okay, it was an outcome, and that's our map. That's what we're planning to. Okay, so I do want to just leave us some time to get into some of those discussions. It sounds like the comments are kind of going off, so I want to get into that. So we're kind of coming to the end. This was designed to be a short one because it's baselines. It's not that exciting, okay? But one thing I do want to point out is if you are not baselining now, if you're not forming agreements now, you're going to have a harder time with artificial intelligence later. Get on top of your data now. Start baselining whatever your baseline is, because it gives you a variance that gives us a trend. We can use the trend to learn from. And that's what we're actually looking for here. Okay, from an artificial intelligence point of view, what we're looking for. So suddenly we've got something helping us with some of this stuff. So there's sort of a hidden value to you formalizing these agreements as you go through.
So Ryan, when you therefore think of the ultimate value of the baseline, I think it's fair to say that predictability is really the ultimate.
All about predictability. Are you going to hit those outcomes or not? If you don't hit the outcome, are you achieving those agreed strategic goals and so on and so forth?
Exactly. And the agreement is nothing else but saying, hey, if we fall outside of these agreed parameters, then let me know about it, right?
That's exactly, that's all it is.
Yeah, exactly. But ultimately, a baseline is nothing else but the ability for me to be predictable.
Yeah, exactly. Now, last slide, and then we're going to get into some questions, and then we're going to open up the questions. So, best practices. If you don't have your agreement formalized and documented, you got nothing. Okay, so document it. You do need, in whatever form these things are, you need them documented. You need to get people involved so they buy into this agreement. If you are a project manager who built your own schedule, in the old days, we would build our own schedule. We'd go into MS Project and baseline number 2 or something, And then that's we would use it. What's the point in that? It's about the agreement. We've got to raise this upper level. Okay. We need to think about, as we've just looked at here, some basic approach or tools to bring together the waterfall and the agile, because you may legitimately deal with these. We also need to think about continuously improving the slot. There's no, as we'll see when we get into the chat, I'm sure there are many ways you can actually just sort of unravel this thing. You do need to apply change control as well, because again, how do you know if you are going off course, and how are you going to then decide that's a new agreement? So suddenly it's not only about baselining, it's about controlling change, but it's then about, let's not get too crazy about it. Let's work out the right level of balancing off the effort of control and reporting on that and being able to actually adapt. And I'm getting to the outcome, it's okay. We're just taking a bit of a detour, we're getting there, it's fine. You need to be able to take that into account as well. Chasing every mark, you did not get your task done on Wednesday when you were meant to, that takes a lot of time. It's too much. It's the old way. It's a 20-year-old way. We need a better way these days.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so last thing, and what I want to know, this we're going to open this up now, is, and I left us about 10 minutes or so for this, I think. What do we want? Have you created a way to bring together agile and non-agile baselines? So I got confused because my clock has just reset on my computer, and I understand how that happened. Okay, so I don't know what the time is.
So far, out of 50 people, 10 have responded, and guess what?
What? No. Yes.
No is yes. So 100% of no so far. 10 have responded. So I think, Ryan, it is an outstandingly good question, because this is ultimately the path that allows us to get this overarching predictability.
Yeah.
How do we utilize, or how do we ensure that we can still track our path and understand the variations to reach that, right? That hybrid approach is I don't think that there is an overarching rule for some of that, right?
There's not a rule for it. And that's the thing that really surprised me. So the method I showed there was something that I was the PMO manager when this lady came up with it. I then thought I'm going to Google it, and I did, being very clever. I went and asked ChatGPT about it as well. There's nothing new. There's no, so I'm interested in anyone. So let's open this up for discussions. We've got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in anyone who wants to unmute themselves to talk about this. If you found a different or a better way to do it, because what I had hoped for was by now someone should have published a whole book on the best way to do this.
So Ryan, so Ryan, I think Sean has a very good question, and I think we should clarify that.
Sean?
Referring to hybrid as baselines for both waterfall and agile projects, would you outline how do you define actually hybrid? Because I still believe that what we call hybrid means nothing else but waterfall except execution in sprints.
No, okay, there's two definitions here. No, there's two definitions.
What do you define under hybrid project?
There's hybrid. So there's a hybrid project, which is you've spoken about, is essentially we do a waterfall requirements and design, we deliver in an iterative, agile, fragile way, and then we finish it off waterfall. Okay,
it's still waterfall.
That's effectively still waterfall. Now, what you will have a different approach to baselines for the waterfall part and for the agile part in the middle. What I'm talking about here is not actually that. It's about, Mark, your project is waterfall, my project is agile. Sean is the PMO manager trying to create a program level report on all of this. How does he do that? Because I, the agile person, turn around and say, we don't do baselines, get lost. The waterfall guy's got this 2,000 line schedule that's baseline, that's kind of meaningless because it's too detailed. This is about creating a outcome-driven approach layer above that both sides can contribute to. You just do it slightly differently. So the agile side is an outcome at the end of a time period. Let's call it that, a sprint or something. The waterfall guy is saying, well, I can give you an exact date, or I'll just give you a milestone / outcome at the end of something, an iteration, a phase, etc. And that gets you to that unified level. So that unified reporting layer.
Yeah, and it really is finding the commonality between the work that we do. Because look, ultimately, we all do work trying to achieve our goals. That's really it. And all we are talking about here is how are we managing our work.
Yeah.
But that commonality of the why we are actually working, so outcomes is still for me that one thing, because as you quite rightly said, we can all agree very quickly, especially in the agile world, on resource commitment and actually costing too, because you can say, hey, I'm going to approve, I don't know, 5 sprints, which is essentially approving a time-phased part where I said, here, I give you a certain amount of time to investigate something or to do something. So you already determine that in the baselining sense, really, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
So,
seeing Ben. So, hey, good to see you. So it's a similar issue across the board for reporting and governing a hybrid PMO.
yeah,
Doing waterfall, agile projects. This is exactly what we're trying to come up with.
that's
Is use
exactly.
the outcomes and the end of time periods as a way to translate up into a common view for everything.
Yeah.
Then that's what you report on. But it's true. It's like what Marcus pointed out is very true. You have to get away from reporting on individual milestones, individual dates,
Right.
to reporting on outcomes, because outcomes are the common factor among everything.
And that's I mean, look at even the project management world right now. We're talking about deliverables, benefits, there are lots of different outputs, lots of different terminologies to describe what we ultimately should actually describe the outcome. Because
Yes.
output is one thing. Yeah, it's great that I now have, shoes that I bought as an output, but it still doesn't make me, an Olympic runner. That's still the
Exactly.
outcome that I want to achieve, right?
Yeah.
And that
Yes,
mindset,
exactly.
I think, is often the challenge in that hybrid environment as well, right? Yeah, because in an
Does anyone want to unmute themselves and discuss any of this, or ask any questions? We're really in. Has anyone got a success story of how this has worked well for them? This is really why I've left some time here to get some of this out there. Charity, you have put your hand up.
I'm sorry, Charity. Please, I'm so sorry. Of course, Charity, not
I feel
Sean.
like I'm hogging the chat because I'm like,
No.
oh, it's such a hot topic. Great.
Okay,
I
go
just
for
want to
it.
say, like, it is such a tricky thing from a portfolio perspective to get alignment of milestone reporting. But like for us at APA, within our project delivery framework, we have a stage gate for waterfall. Those gold milestones are reportable across all levels up to the portfolio. But then within Agile, there's a bit more flexibility. They, instead of having plan and design as one phase and deliver as the next phase, it's plan, design, and deliver. But within that, like my ask is, it's not just, you can't just report your next gold milestone in 10 months' time. The value drops, that outcome that you talk about is so important. So for me, I say at a minimum, you have to have a gold milestone every 3 months. So you have to be able to say, this is your return on your investment, right?
Yes,
Because it's not an open check. It's like, this is what I'm delivering for the money that you're spending on me at the moment and my project team in an agile way. So like we do have a very set standard framework with key milestones, but there is flexibility for agile, but it's very hard to define. It's super tricky.
Well, because if you translate that into that, really the outcome in an agile team should probably be much more frequent. If you think about the terminology of agile and trying to deliver value quicker, then trying to press that, really map that into, map that ball into this whole of design and planning, because that's how we have that reporting structure, is almost an artificial way of trying to communicate value creation for the effort that we created, right? So it really is that outcome definition that we all need to understand and be clear about. That makes it difficult. But it's a very good approach, at least by consolidating and saying, well, the trend for us is that agile does those in those kinds of milestones, water-like milestones. Yeah, that's definitely one way of consolidating that, Ryan. That's really good. Thanks, Charity. It's good feedback. Yeah.
I see, Charles, you've put a comment in. So R&D typically does agile and needs to agree a set number of releases or dates. Yeah, but again, that is, so you've got the dates, you're going to have to agree on, I suppose, I don't know, if you may want to unmute yourself and describe it. Do you know what you're going to deliver in that time? Again, it's about, there's got to be some sort of outcome along the way, and
Well,
that gives you what you are measuring.
yeah, I think that the problem with the R&D is defining the outcome again right now,
May not
even if
know,
the outcome means it wasn't worth the time, right?
You at the minimum, you are baselining your dates, the number of releases, dates, the people, the amount of money you're willing to spend on this. Something gets baselined.
Yeah. With all of that being said, especially in the R&D area, Charles, in my opinion, what do they say? 100% predictability equals 0% innovation, right? So I think especially in the R&D environment, that can be tricky finding that balance, right?
Ben has got his hand up. I'm sure he's got a view.
Hey,
Ben,
all, I'm gonna do my. Yeah, I'd love to try. I am just currently coming back from a customer site, so I'm on the move. But a view
Ben's
that
one of
I
our
want
Sensei
to touch
consultants.
on. Yes, I wanted to touch on a concept that we have done with one of our customers, which is Toshiba. It's actually a technical professional services firm. We haven't called it baselining, but we have implemented a very robust approach of capturing the definition of the outcome for the project, to capture both the cost level, the resource level, and also the revenue level. So the concept is that we create work orders. Now, every project has a defined number of work orders, and that's how all of the work that's going to be done for the customer is defined. And for each work order, there is a definition of scope. There's a definition of all of the costs that are assigned to that work order. There's a definition of all of the labor that's assigned to that work order. And the scope is technically the outcomes. So if you think about it, that is technically the baseline. That is what gets recorded after all of the forecasting and the project is approved. And that's then what the project is actually tracked against. It's not called a baseline, but it absolutely is the baseline.
It's the agreement. We need to get away from baselines and call them agreements.
It's a bad terminology. Yeah.
Charles, you
Thanks, Ben.
You had yourself unmuted there? I think it was Charles.
Yeah, I had two use cases. The one I mentioned earlier, but the R&D one is quite interesting because it was a specific question that was asked of mine. A guy that works in R&D, and their executive wants to know when, and he said, "I can't tell you when. I can tell you how many times I'm going to try and get it right." Okay.
Yeah.
And then they agree. They say, "Okay, you can try 10 releases, but then I'm going to call you up, and say, right, have we got a product?" And that's a real life product. The one where I had success was where an SAP backend was driving the waterfall, and an online system front end, typical development, front end development, web development, was driving the agile. And we had to actually do the baseline on SAP because they work waterfall. So Agile wasn't really baselined, but there was agreement. There was an agreement as to by when should you have this done.
Yeah, Charles, and I think the terminology baseline can encompass quite a lot of things, and an agreement actually outlines quite a lot of things. And then in the agile world, we can definitely agree to the time framework of saying, hey, I give you 5 sprints or a certain amount of times. And I think even in the R&D world, where we don't know what the outcome is going to look like, where the work is actually discovering that outcome is, we just have to accept time phasing that in that sense. And again, that's then the agreement. It may not mean that you have scope or have outcome in that sense. Again, that's the argument of how do you define outcome?
Yeah.
Hey Ryan, who'd have thought that, what did you say, a boring subject like baseline? How interesting that becomes when you suddenly have 2 different forms of working, but still required to report work on that portfolio level, no matter how you actually execute the work. Is a very fascinating topic, actually.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Anyone else want to jump in and share anything or ask anything? Have we covered off the questions in the chat? Charity has said Microsoft project is boring. Okay, Charity, we come from the old days when Microsoft project was the thing. It's not boring. It's actually a very powerful scheduling engine, and it needs to be understood and respected. So no, it's not. But you know, baselines can be boring unless you redefine it as we are doing. Ben Leahy.
Benjamin.
Hey, so question: who should be responsible for baselining?
So, not maybe you, but not me, if I put it like that. So,
well, Benji, when you, let's say you move into a new place, who needs to sign the contract? So it always needs to be the people who are ultimately responsible providing you the assets are the people who need to agree. And now you may outsource that, and that's what the PMO quite often does. They do I'm going to call that the administrative part of it. But ultimately it should be the people that need to agree to the contract to ultimately say, look, I agree with that. That's awesome.
So
not the project manager.
No, customer and delivery, I don't know, agent, whatever you want to call it.
That's right. That's right.
Like forming the agreement. Yeah. You may, as a PMO side, may physically document it and make it happen and produce reports against it. You may push the button, but under instruction.
And actually interesting, when our business case gets approved, that is ultimately the commitment of the scope, budget, and timeline by the stakeholder. I think that can only work if you already are very clear of what the scope may entails. So look, in API terms, that makes sense. We are talking about assets there, so therefore we do need to have that. But in other terms, it is of course sometimes difficult. Agile software, again, I think as long as you have the details, and I think anything construction, you need to have a long design that actually meticulously plans those things out. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Ryan, something tells me that this will not be the last baseline session that we have.
No, I think we'll do another one based on this. I think this is worth going into a bit more. Yeah. I'm a bit surprised. Good.
Yeah, and maybe even refining that of saying, the world of the baseline world of waterfall, agile, and hybrid. What does that mean?
Yeah.
More and more.
Okay.
Good.
Can Ryan and I just add something too, man?
Please.
Listening through this is boring topic. This is fun. But look, I think you guys defined it quite well. Baseline is the agreement. I think maybe for future thought is well, if you think about it, outcomes really, we're measuring success. I think there's kind of, when we talk about measurement and we think about baselines and agreements and things, it's okay, well, how do we measure success and how do we measure the performance? Because I think that's where we get crisscrossed and confused, but ultimately that's what we're trying to do to make sure that we're on the right path, the compass is pointing to the right direction. But I think it's kind of down to those two splits when it comes down to measuring stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great topic.
Thank you. We have come to the end of our time now, so I'm going to hand back to Gemma, who'll kind of wrap it up. Thank you all very much for this. A bit of a different one today, but actually turned out to be a very engaging one. So thank you for those who got involved.
Thanks, Ryan.
As Ryan said, thank you, everyone. We will send out the recording this afternoon, so you'll get that as well as the slide deck. But have a good afternoon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks all. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye.